I am Kurt Francis, and last year I was a victim of identity theft and internet scamming. This is my story. The first time I found out when I was sued was I was actually moving my office and my phone rang, and on the phone came a number from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and so I didn't pick it up. But eventually did listen to the message, and it was a reporter from Pittsburgh saying, would I comment on the federal lawsuit that I've been sued in? And I was just blown away with this comment. I couldn't believe it, so I immediately went to my computer, and what I searched in Google was Kurt Francis lawsuit. And the first thing that popped up on Google was the lawsuit and the report from the reporter. The lawsuit was about somebody who had taken my identity and used it to scam a person of $300,000. It was elaborate and sophisticated and a fraudulent cyber catfishing scheme that apparently I had stolen $300,000 from a person. When I found out about this lawsuit, I immediately called my husband, Fernando Francis, and told him about it. And then I called David Romero, our CEO and president of Century 21 Award, and I forwarded him the report that the reporter had put on the internet.
So on Wednesday the 3rd, I got a voicemail from Kurt, and the message that Kurt left was that it was urgent that I called him back, and it was in the evening, and Kurt's not one for drama, so I knew that if he said it was urgent that I needed to call him back. And so I called him back later that day, and he told me what had happened and what he'd been accused of, and then he sent me the article that was written about it. When I first saw the report, when I read the report it was really hard to process. It's like if somebody tells you that the sky is green, right? You're like, how could this? It can't be true. How what I'm reading doesn't make any sense, and it was really hard to process that at that time. So it was made me very nervous for Kurt, because I knew that not only was his reputation at stake, but his entire livelihood was at stake.
So David said to me that he would speak to our company attorney and get back to me. The next morning, David called me really early, and they had already received a report from Century 21 International about how this has affected some people in Pittsburgh.
I knew that this was a very serious matter when I heard about it, and so I wanted to get legal advice so I could give Kurt the best possible advice. I knew right away that being innocent wasn't going to be enough, that we needed to actively fight on his behalf. So after I got legal advice, I talked to Kurt first thing in the morning the next day, and I knew that he needed to have a defense attorney to represent him, to aggressively represent him and make sure that his innocence was known. And so we hooked him up with the best attorney so that someone could be actively fighting for him on his behalf.
So they gave me San Diego's #1 criminal defense attorney, Earl Pott from Kleindienst, who has offices in San Diego, Seattle, Los Angeles, Irvine, and Sacramento. And so I picked up the phone and I called Earl, and I managed to get him on the line.
My name is Earl Pott. I'm a shareholder in the law firm Kleindienst PC. We're a litigation firm primarily here in the state of California. I met Kurt Francis in the early November when he came to me after having been accused of committing a terrible fraud against a woman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
So then the following day at 9:30, Friday the 5th of November, I'll never forget, I spent 2 hours with Earl. And I tell you, I learned a lot. I broke down in tears, and I realized that I would hate to be on the other side of the courtroom with this attorney, because he challenged me to make sure that I wasn't the criminal and I wasn't guilty of this. I went through a rough time in that 2-hour session.
My first impression of Kurt was how earnest he was and how determined he was that I believed that he had nothing to do with these allegations. When I read the complaint, it was a very detailed complaint of some 45 pages. It had 15 exhibits, was fairly well written, and so I was skeptical. Frankly, I wanted to make sure that Kurt was who he said he was, and definitely wanted to make sure that he wasn't the person that the plaintiff said he was. Well, we met for about 2 hours in my office, and we went through all of the allegations. I was particularly concerned about the fact that it was clearly his photos that had been used against this woman, and apparently also videos. So we went through every single one of those, and I was tough with Kurt, mostly because if you're going to represent someone who's been charged or accused of crimes, the tactics or strategy that you choose vary very differently depending on whether or not you think that person didn't do it or if you think they did. Right? If you think they did do it in a civil case like this, you would try to settle up as quickly as possible, as quietly as possible, and whatever you do, avoid having this lawsuit go on any longer. But in this particular case, Kurt was adamant that he didn't do it, so we chose a slightly different tack. So on reading the complaint, I could see that what had happened here was someone using Kurt's images, Kurt's photos, and Kurt's videos, someone had assumed an identity of a third party. He was supposedly a gentleman named Mr. Otto, who was an executive for a British company. And he had befriended this woman online through a dating app and then had persuaded her to lend him or lend his company money, substantial sums of money totaling almost $300,000. I later came to learn that this kind of scheme is called catfishing. And just as was alleged in the complaint, catfishing is when a person assumes someone else's identity to trick the victim into giving them money online. This case was unusual in the sense that the plaintiff was alleging that Kurt was using his own images, his own photos and videos, which I thought strange from the beginning. I thought if you're going to go to the effort of creating an online identity, a false identity, why would you use your own photos? But nevertheless, the plaintiff's complaint read well. I had an opportunity to speak to plaintiff's counsel, and they were fairly convinced that Kurt Francis was their guy. They were convinced that he was a fraudster.
I asked my attorney, Earl Part, if I could get arrested, and he said absolutely, because we're not sure exactly where the situation is right now. And this was 6-7 days before I was leaving for my father's memorial service in South Africa. Well, that changed everything. I was having nightmares just about every second night, waking up, FBI arresting me, San Diego police arresting me. I was in jail, then I was in prison. And Fernando said to me, I think you need to go and see your doctor because you're not sleeping well. I went to go and see my doctor, and he said, I want to refer you to a psychologist who handles this kind of stuff. And I haven't had to see a psychologist in 35 years. So why should I now? But I'm so glad I did, because I was going through a lot of turmoil and a lot of things were at me, and the biggest fight was in my own mind. And I was really privileged to have people around me. One of them, David Romero, who was phenomenal in supporting me because he realized what I was going through. He could see the stress I was going through. He could see, and every single time he would just encourage me. He would call me daily for the first few weeks, every single day, just making sure I'm still on path to succeed, because we still had a lot of business to do. We're trying to close transactions and open escrows. And David was there supporting me, as well as our manager, Deshaun Fairley, was phenomenal with that support.
Through the whole process, this was a lot for Kurt. You know, he has a lot going on, not only with this, but with business and with family and lots. So just being there for Kurt was the best support that I could be, and keep telling him that you didn't do anything wrong. We're gonna get through this, and just being there and giving him support was the best thing that I could do for him.
My attorney advised me that I needed to report this to the FBI and any law enforcement. So I did with the San Diego police. I had no problem with that. But trying to report it to the FBI was crazy. I was on the phone with them a few times and they didn't want to accept my case. They said I had to go to the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission. When I spoke to the Federal Trade Commission, they didn't want to talk to me because they said I had lost no money. So the FBI sent me to the Federal Trade Commission and they sent me back. Eventually, I got somebody at the FBI who would only give me their ID number, but not even a case number, but they did document what I had told them. That was a relief. The San Diego police detective asked me a question. In fact, he asked me twice in different ways. He said to me, did your company fire you during this time? And I said, absolutely not. No, he didn't. I didn't even know that that was perhaps a consideration. And then he asked me again, did they not suspend you from working? I said, no, in fact, they did exactly the opposite. David Ramirez, CEO, and some of the managers encouraged me to even work harder and for me to be more focused on my business and produce more. It wasn't work less or not working, it was to work even harder to do the right thing. And that was really, really phenomenal. That's a phenomenal support that I got from my company.
I know the detective asked Kurt, why didn't he get fired at the time when we first heard about it? And I did get advice that we should let Kurt go, or at least put him on a leave of absence until we get this figured out. However, I knew these allegations, you can't even say it's unlike Kurt, it's almost the opposite of Kurt, of what they asked him to do, what they said, what they accused him of. So I knew that it wasn't possible, but even then, I had to have the conversation with Kurt, and I said, look, Kurt, if there's anything that you need to tell me, you need to tell me right now. Whatever it is, we'll get through it, and believe me, whatever there is to find, it's gonna be found out, so you need to tell me if there's any truth to this at all. And he said, absolutely not, that there's no ounce of truth in this at all. And so from that point forward, we went in the protection mode, and I never thought about terminating him again.
Well, so when I first met Kurt, of course, I was skeptical. Kurt maintained his innocence from beginning to end. And the longer we got to know each other and the more we got to work together, the more I understood that he was exactly what he looked like, which was he's a lovely guy with a great big heart, and these allegations I know put him through a lot of personal anguish because they're not remotely like who he is. So plaintiff's counsel sent us half dozen to a dozen pieces of electronic evidence, images and a video that he claimed would prove that Kurt Francis was in fact the perpetrator. What we were able to determine, though, is that all of those images, including the video, were publicly sourced information. Things that Kurt had put up on the internet in his role as a real estate agent or as a motivational speaker. And those images and the video were repurposed by the real perpetrator to make it seem like it was Kurt, or that Kurt was speaking. Once we were able to determine that, I presented that evidence to the plaintiff's counsel, and to their credit, they dismissed the case. One thing that was really important to us was that the dismissal had to do more than simply dismiss the case, but it had to exonerate Kurt. In a federal case, if the plaintiff wants to dismiss the case, they can simply dismiss the case without prejudice for no reason at all. But it was important to us that the dismissal actually say that Kurt was not the perpetrator. And so after a few phone calls, I was able to persuade the plaintiff's counsel to do exactly that. So when they issued their dismissal under Rule 41A of the federal rules, their dismissal actually says in bold, after further investigation, plaintiff has determined that defendants are not the perpetrators of the frauds described in the complaint in the action. We're hoping that that settles the matter so that anybody who has seen these false allegations will also run across this dismissal and understand that they were false from beginning to end.
I never imagined that I would ever go through what I went through. The hell, the frustration, the accusations, feeling like a criminal. And I don't want anybody else to go through what I went through. So, some advice for you. Take action straight away if this happens, and don't just sit back. And if you ever need an attorney, you want to find the very best attorney possible to represent you. If you want to speak to me or contact me, reach out to me. I would be very happy to speak to you.